Welcome to a video guide on how to create a basic shooting gameplay in Miliastra Wonderland. These are the concepts we'll be utilizing today and how they relate to each other. Let's first set up the skill to shoot projectiles. Hop over to the combat preset interface. Switch to the skill module, create a new skill, we'll name it Shoot Projectile. You can change the icon of the skill if you like. This icon seems appropriate. We'll change the skill type to aiming. Here the aiming settings are up to your preference. But I'll set mine as toggle, movement while aiming is on, and a custom launch animation duration of 0.5 so I can shoot the projectiles a bit faster. Now let's hop into the animation editor for this skill. Right off the bat, we have two options for the aiming skill: bow aiming or throwing. Either one works fine, it's just visual preference. I'll pick the throwing one for now. From here you can see the aiming skills consist of three parts, where the second one is a looping animation for before the shooting takes place, and the third part is when the shooting actually happens. Let's prep a couple of status that needs to occur. First, the most mandatory one is enter aiming state. We'll stretch it to cover the entire scope of the animations. This status changes our camera. We can preview the looks by pressing the Enable Secondary Screen Preview. The default has a first-person view kind of look. I'll change it so that we can have third-person kind of view, so we can see the character animation. I'll put the Z offset to -2. This puts the camera behind the character. Y to 0.2, making it slightly higher, and X to 0.5 so I can see where I'm aiming without the character blocking. I'll also increase the FOV to 60. Next, I'll also turn the transition duration of the camera changing from entering the aiming state to around 0.2 seconds instead of the default 1 second. All of this is up to your preference. There's a couple other status I want to add. Since we're out of status tracks in this animation editor, we can just right click here to add more. Remember that you can scroll through the tracks by either holding left mouse on the scroll bar on the most right, or finding an empty space in the track and holding the left mouse and dragging it up or down. Now with two more status tracks added, I'll add these two status: Show Crosshair and Show Target Effect. I'll also drag them so they cover the entire animation. For Show Target Effect, we want to pick one of the effect types. Choose one based on your preference. This basically shows in VFX on where the target should be. The detection range is the range where the effect will show. I'll change it to 5 meters to 20 meters. The target faction is a filter on whether or not a certain faction should be considered in the targeting, where everything else is act as if it doesn't exist for the target effect. With the status track set up, we want to ensure the response in this skill is set to the correct branch. Click the response_1 in the branch track. This basically allows the animation to change from the looping animation into the third part of the animation. We set it to the default branch to ensure that it goes in the third part of the animation. Exit the animation editor. Remember to save the skill. The exclamation mark here denotes that there are unsaved changes to the skill. Next, let's head over to the Player tab within the Combat Preset interface. Hop over to the Class section, select the middle tab here, which brings us to the Skills section for the class. We'll change the active skill quantity to 1, and select our Shoot Projectile skill we made. If we do a quick test play, we should see the E key that enables us to do some aiming. Next, we'll need to set up the projectile so that we can fire it. In the combat preset, switch to the projectile module. We'll create a new projectile. I'll name it Basic Projectile. Right off the bat, we can see what the projectile will look like. There's not much options for now. If there's one that you like, you can set it as that. But I'll set mine to Empty Object for now, because I'll give it a VFX effects for the looks instead. Set the native collisions to off, as we won't need it for this scenario. We'll also set the life cycle duration of 5. That's how long the projectile can persist before it destroys itself. We'll also extend the range of how far it can travel before it destroys itself by setting the X-Z component and the Y component here to both 20. Now in the second middle tab, I'll add in a VFX. If you pick the model for the projectile in the first tab, you can skip this. I'll select the VFX assets. We can preview the effects by pressing the play button. The power projectile at configuration ID 64 seems good. You can add multiple VFX and stack them together if you like, but to keep it simple, we'll just add one. The rest of the VFX settings, we'll just leave it as default. In the projectile motion device section, we can go into the advanced editing. This allows us to customize how the projectile moves. There's several different types of movement: linear projectile, parabolic projectile, tracking projectile, and radial fire. Both tracking projectile and radial fire requires an entity to track or specify. For this video, we'll just use linear projectile. The z-axis will always be the forward direction based on the orientation of the projectile. We'll set the z-axis to 8, which naturally changes the speed of it. The rest we'll leave it as it is. You can preview the motion by pressing Preview Current Motion. Note that the VFX isn't included in the preview. Before we jump into the on-hit detection to determine how the projectile behaves when it hits something, we need to jump into the third tab to create some ability units. Go into Advanced Editing and we'll be adding 3 ability units. For the first one, we want to switch the ability unit type to Destroy Self. This will allow us to destroy the projectile based on circumstances of our choosing. We'll change the delay time to 0 and rename it to Destroy Self. Next, we'll create another ability unit and switch its type to Direct Attack. There's a lot of settings we can play with here, but to keep it simple, we'll just change the damage increment to 20 so it deals 20 damage on a 0 defense unit. Scroll down below and we'll select the VFX to go with this attack. We can preview these VFX by pressing the play button on the side. The yellow flash in configuration ID 7 seems fine for this. Rename the ability unit to Direct Attack. Lastly, we'll create another ability unit and switch its type to VFX Plane. We'll be using this ability unit when the projectile disappears without hitting anything. Let's find a VFX to go with it. The dust effect in configuration ID 41 looks good. We'll rename the ability unit to VFX Dust. Let's exit out of the ability unit configurations, hop back to the first tab, and we can make use of the ability units we just created. Click Add Ability Unit under Behavior Settings at End of Life Cycle. This determines what ability units gets activated when the projectile is destroyed when either from exceeding the life cycle's duration or the XYZ boundaries. We'll choose VFX Dust. Next, let's hop over to the second tab and go into Advanced Editing under the On-Hit Detection component. Here we can configure the rules and hitbox area of the projectile. The hitbox area we can leave it on default, but feel free to play around with it. For the basic settings, we have 3 trigger types: single trigger, non-repeating trigger, and repeating trigger. Single trigger means the projectile will only trigger once in its lifetime. Non-repeating trigger means the projectile will only trigger once for every unique entity in its lifetime. Repeating trigger means the projectile will constantly trigger, restricted by the trigger interval setting. We'll set it to single trigger. Detection delay time is the delay in which detection starts after the entity is created, which in this case is the projectile. This is useful for avoiding projectile from hitting the launcher. I'll set it to 0.5. Enable continuous collision detection is used for entities at high speeds. For this video, we won't cover it in order to keep it simple. Next is the filter settings. This basically allows us to customize what the on-hit detection component will count as a hit. We'll need a Boolean filter node, so let's hop over to the other window. In the Miliastra Wonderland window, separate from your Genshin Impact window, click Window on the top left and open up Client Node Graph Resources Explorer. Boolean filter nodes graphs are run client-side, hence why we'll find it here. Let's create a Boolean filter node graph. We want our projectile to only hit things that are of a different faction and not have a hurtbox. So I'll name my graph difffaction_hurtbox. On-hit detections can hit 3 types of things. We can conveniently see this if we enable the Enable filters below in Genshin's on-hit detection components filter settings under the Hit Layer filter, Hurtbox, Scene, and Object Self-Collision. This is basically the native collision that entities can have. The last 2 do not return target entities when we pass it into a Boolean filter, and that's how we can determine if what we hit is a hurtbox. A hurtbox will pass in a target entity for the Boolean filter for on-hit detection. Back to the Miliastra Wonderland window, double-click on the Boolean filter node graph to edit it. Let's get the target entity, compare it to nothing. If this is not true, it will be a hurtbox. We also want to get the self entity, which in this case will be the projectile, get its faction, and the target entity's faction, and then compare it. If they aren't the same, there should be a hit. So our final conditions are, if it's a hurtbox, and if it isn't the same faction, we'll return true. Save this node graph. You can see on the bottom there's a dot next to the save icon. That means there's unsaved changes. Let's return back to the Genshin window. We can select the filter node graph we just made. If you want to do additional filtering, you can press the Enable Filters below. These filters are basically an additional AND statement on top of the filter node graph, if you have one. If these filters are sufficient, you can actually choose to not use any filter node graphs. If you set these filters to none, nothing will get hit. What you select are basically what should get hit. Now that we have the conditions to determine if something should be hit, let's add in the ability units that should occur when something does get hit. Click on the Add Ability Unit under the On-Hit Trigger settings, select Direct Attack and Destroy Self. We're done with the projectile, make sure to save it. With the projectile ready, we need to create it when we actually shoot. To do that, we need a skill node graph. Head over to the Miliastra Wonderland window. Because skill node graphs are running client-side, we'll find them in the Client Node Graph Resources Explorer. So let's click the Client Node Graph Resources Explorer and create a new skill node graph. We'll name it Shoot Basic Projectile. Double click on it to edit. We'll create the projectile with the Fixed Point Projectile Launch node. This creates a local projectile. Copy the prefab ID from the Genshin window on the basic projectile. This will allow us to determine which projectile to use. And to determine where and what orientation we want the projectile to spawn, we'll be utilizing the attachment point of our character called GI_focus anchor. You can see the attachment points if you go to Genshin's combat preset and go into the character settings, click Advanced Editing under Custom Attachment Points. You will see that the character has an attachment point called GI_focus anchor, and above it, it says Projectile Initial Position. This is what we'll use. To do that, in the Miliastra Wonderland Node Graph Editor, we'll get Current Character. This is the character that's using the skill. Get Target Attachment Point Location, and get Target Attachment Point Rotation. Type in GI_focus anchor for both of them, and link it to the projectile launch node. We won't need to put anything into the track target because the projectile isn't a tracking projectile or radial fire type. For projectile faction, we'll just get the character's faction. Link the node graph start to the projectile launch node. Save, and we are done with this node graph. To tie it up, we need to go back to the skills and go back to the animation editor for the shoot projectile skill we made. Right below the third animation sequence in the Start Event Track tab, click on the plus icon and select the skill node graph we just made. Exit the animation editor and save. And now let's playtest this. Next, we need targets to hit. Let's go to the prefab library. We'll create a target dummy. Choose whatever model you like, but I'll pick the Wicked Warlock target. Go to the second tab, change the base HP to 1000 so it doesn't die instantly. I'll change the base defense to 0 so I can easily see the 20 damage the projectile does. Next, go to the Advanced Editing under Hurtbox setting. We need to give this entity a hurtbox. Add hurtbox and size it so that it fits the model. Exit the editing for Hurtbox. Go to the third tab, we'll add a common component. In this case, a nameplate so that we can see the HP go down. Go into the Advanced Editing under Nameplate, add a nameplate, change the visible radius to 20. Change the type to HP and Shield, offset Y to 500, size to 200 width and 20 height, HP display style to progress bar and value, exit out of the editing, and save it. We can go back to Entity Placement and plop down 2 of that prefab we just made. We'll change one of them to have the same faction as us under the faction setting. Now let's test play. The projectile should damage the one with a different faction from us. And pass through the one with the same faction as us. Exit the test play and you can also plop in a creation and damage it. And that's the basics of creating a shooting gameplay.